So the primary purpose of the digital brigade at that time was to really network all the vehicles, and they could actually have complete visibility of where the friendlies were, so you didn't have a lot of fratricide. In fact, I don't think we ever had a case of fratricide when I was deployed with the Stryker Brigade. Afghanistan's got mountains. If we can't seize the high ground and maintain the high ground, we're screwed. Iraq, you got line of sight distance. Chief of Staff says, Mike, you're going to Iraq.
Welcome back to Blue Seal Heroes. I'm Dave Ross. We're here today with retired Colonel Paul Fischer. He was formative in the first digital brigade in the Army, and that was completely revolutionary. Why don't you give a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Well, yeah, I'm Paul Fischer. I'm a retired colonel in the U.S. Army, Signal Corps. Had a great ride. Enjoyed every minute of the military experience, as it were. Had an opportunity to see several combat tours. Had the opportunity to do the Stryker Brigade. Both kind of engineered that and deployed with those guys. Great experience there. And
well, tell us about the setting up of the Stryker Brigade, because that was quite revolutionary when it came about.
Yeah, it was absolutely the most interesting thing. You know, prior to working with the Stryker Brigade, I was an observer controller, an OC out in National Training Center. And it happened to be during that time that I was an OC that we had the Task Force 21 had come through and was doing their digital AWE, or Advanced Warfighting Experiment in National Training Center. And because I was a signaleer and I was an OC, they asked me to kind of be the observer controller of that whole rotation. And so somehow I became a default expert on the digital communications that Fort Hood had brought out to MTC. In the course of doing that, I wrote a really long report because the Signal Center wanted to get feedback directly on the ground, you know, unvarnished. So I wrote a really long AAR paper that I had provided to Fort Gordon. And after that, I got notified that, hey, there's this new thing called the Stryker Brigade we're trying to build. And there's a new thing called the Brigade Coordination Cell, or the BCC, that will be working out of Fort Lewis. It'd be great if you and two other soldiers went out there and kind of camped on the BCC group and find out what they're doing and be a direct liaison for us back at Fort Gordon. Of course I said yes, because I've always loved Fort Lewis, love Washington State. It was an opportunity to get back here. And so came here, and then next thing I know, I started to actually be the architect of what the Stryker Brigade would look like from a comms perspective. And then, you know, one thing led to another. Next thing I know, I was sitting in front of the 3-2 IBCT at the time, the interim brigade combat team, brigade commander, and he said, hey, you know, we just lost our S6. Do you want to come on over? Because everybody in the entire world tells me that you're the smartest guy about IBCT.
They start flattering you. That's risky.
Yeah, well, I, of course, I wanted to be a Brigade 6, and I wanted to do something, you know, evolutionary, and that's what this was. And so I said, of course, yes, and that led me on a journey of working with the organization that I actually had helped design.
So tell us about what its purpose was.
So the primary purpose of the digital brigade at the time was to really network all the vehicles. It was, you know, there was a coined term that was network-centric warfare. You know, how the sensors and the targeters and the shooters and the fires would all be integrated, and you could all watch it on a big video screen. And that was the premise, is to get orders and situational awareness back and forth from the front lines to the rear, from the commander's intent, immediately flash to a foxhole in the field somewhere. And so we had a lot of digital enablers for that. You know, you had high capacity data radios. You had all sorts of interesting things. We had a satellite system that was basically commercial off the shelf stuff that we ruggedized, and we created satellite nodes within the brigade that had never been done before, at least at that level. I mean, of course, it's been done at higher levels. It's been done since Vietnam. But those assets were normally reserved for, you know, Corps and Army size. Here it's sitting at a brigade all of a sudden. So that was the intent, was to basically rapidly transmit information, situational awareness to anybody, anywhere in the battlefield within the friendly force.
So it was based around the Stryker vehicle because they were mobile.
So actually, It was named the Stryker Brigade because the Stryker vehicle showed up.
Oh,
At the time,
the other way around, in other words.
yeah, so when the IBCT was actually conceived, we didn't know what vehicle we were going to actually get. So we were running around in Humvees and just, thinking that we're going to get something different. We didn't know that the Stryker actually as a vehicle showed up until a year later. And it showed up and all of a sudden, we're the cool guys in the block.
Well,
as it was back then.
That's fantastic. So each of the vehicles was connected to each of the other vehicles. You said you were talked about the
and a majority of them, yes, yeah,
and also, of course, to command.
yes, yeah.
So, and most of those links were satellite, or are they a combination of land link and satellite link?
Yeah, so the vehicles were networked together for the most part by something called EPLRS, which is basically an enhanced position locating radio. They communicated that way. Some of the vehicles, the command vehicles, had small satellite domes on top of the vehicle to communicate for longer distances. But so you can consider it like, in today's vernacular, it would be a meshed network. You have your home internet, and then you have these little pods of connectivity. So the original premise was that you'd have these pods of connectivity amongst vehicles that then would go to a central node, and then that node would communicate to another central node, and so on and so forth. That was the concept.
Understood. So how did this turn from experiment into field?
I tell you, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of contractors. I think when we finally deployed, we had close to 265 contractors that deployed with us, which was just ridiculous. Most of them were actually General Dynamics, who were the makers of the Stryker vehicle. But, I had a contingent of, I would say, 30 contractors on my own, just for the communication systems. But we had to go through a series of validation exercises. Are you ready to go? You have initial tests, then you have a subsequent test, then you have the final test, and so on and so forth.
Those were done here?
So they were done in a combination of locations. They were done here. We did some in Yakama. So we did them out in the back 40 of Fort Lewis. We did some in Yakama. Then the big final exvals were actually at JRTC and National Training Center. So we did those back to back, which was a monumental effort for the poor logisticians that were out there, because they had to figure out how to rail from one location to then just pick up and rail to the next one. So, back to back was never done before, and we did it because there was a crunch of the Iraq War was coming. So there was an insatiable desire by senior leadership in the Army that we spent a whole bunch of money on this brigade. We need to get them and prove them in combat. So we did a lot of things compressed. Do it as rapidly as you can and make it as realistic as possible. And it was about a year and a half of high stress, high emotion, before we finally got a chance to get deployed for real.
So you were deployed in Iraq. You were telling me earlier that Iraq was chosen over Afghanistan because of the terrain.
Yes, yeah. And so that was a really interesting moment in time. I think you as a veteran know, and I'm sure some of the viewers out there know, that in the past, signal leaders or the communicators were usually the last people to know what was really going on. So it was typically the S3s of the world, or the operations officer of the world, and the XOs and the commanders would all huddle around some kind of order they received from above, and they would say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and here's the plan. And then brief it to everybody, and oh, by the way, that communicator, figure out how to support it. The neat thing about the Stryker Brigade, it created a complete paradigm shift to the typical plan development process, the mission planning, in that essentially I'm now sitting with the S3, the ops officer, I'm sitting with the commander, I'm sitting with the S2 for intel, and we're figuring out how to do this, because communications will make or break the plan. So that specific example, because we were Stryker, because we were spending a lot of money, we had a lot of eyes on us from senior leadership across the Army, as well as within the Senate and House Arms Committees. So we had just got done with our rotation at JRTC, and we had previously we did NTC, then we went out to JRTC, and we were at the final brief tent, and in comes the Chief of Staff of the Army, in comes the First Corps Commander, and they sit down with the Brigade Commander, Colonel Mike Rounds, and the Chief of Staff of the Army said, Mike, where do you want to go? And of course, all the staff is sitting around, you know, in the cheap seats watching the spectacle, as it were. And the brigade commander kind of looked at the chief of staff in the Army and then looked at the First Corps commander and said, where's my comms guy? Where's the 6? And he goes, Fisher, get over here. And I was like, me? What do I have? So there I was sitting with the chief of staff of the Army, the First Corps commander, my boss, and Mike goes, or Colonel Round said, Paul, where do you think we do best? And I looked at him and I looked at the chief of staff of the Army. I said, well, Afghanistan's got mountains. If we can't seize the high ground and maintain the high ground, we're screwed. Iraq, you got line of sight distance. I would take us to Iraq to be successful. Chief of staff says, Mike, you're going to Iraq. And it was the funniest thing. I mean, it wasn't widely heard. I think a lot of the staff were told to get out at that point in time. So I think it was a grand total of like maybe 7 of us in that little tent. Yeah, that's how we got to Iraq. And I think it was like 6 months later.
That has got to be the strangest reason for a deployment I have ever heard.
But it's true. I mean, it's amazing, but it's true. And it was just it was the perfect opportunity to really kind of prove our worth. And I know there was a lot of desire to make sure that this worked because of the amount of money that was spent to make this unit.
So where was the war at this point when you were sent to Iraq?
So you have Operation Iraqi Freedom. Mm-hmm. That was the initial OIF one. Mm-hmm. Because we were just redeploying back from JRTC when we went across the line, we couldn't be part of that first wave. So they called us OIF 1.5 when the Stryker Brigade came in. And so we had most of the direct kinetic fighting was basically done in the sense of seizing palaces, sub-palaces, and key location, key terrain. So when we were told you're going in, you know, we had the opportunity to just basically engage on some pre-deployment site surveys. We did actually 3 of them to go. We went into Iraq, we talked to commands and such, and it was just interesting how, again, the paradigm shift of using a Stryker Brigade was most units would say, okay, I'm coming in. The commander of that AOR would say, great, you're mine. Your task organized underneath me. So when we went on those pre-deployment site surveys, the commander says, great, Stryker Brigade, you're in my place. And we're like, no, we're not. I have more communications capability and this brigade has more firepower than probably your division. So no, we're not doing that. And so it was a very hard thing for the commanders to really understand what the Stryker Brigade concept was. So we did a lot of educating.
Yeah.
And when it finally came down to it, we became kind of a reserve for northern Iraq. So when we crossed the border from Kuwait up to Iraq, we were considered basically a reserve for the command stationed in Baghdad. So we were kind of task organized to different locations where people needed support or units needed support. Our first when we convoyed up to a place called Al Samaniya, I believe it was, and the FOB was Pace Setter, which was a field artillery kind of location, and that's where we kind of hunkered down initially, and then we started branching out from there to either to Crit and Mosul, and we started to move around within the battle space.
Now, Mosul was where the Iraqis went after they were thrown out of Fallujah.
Right. Yep.
And it was one of the worst places fighting in the war. What was the Stryker Brigade's role in that? Was it already over by the time you got there, or
yeah.
was it?
Yeah, for the most part. In fact, when we finally got officially moved to Mosul, and most of the direct major conflict from that standpoint was basically done, at least from the first wave of action. Not saying that we didn't have a lot of action, because we lost a lot of soldiers in the brigade, and a lot of their lives were lost during that period of time. But I believe it was 101st that was there, so they had parachuted into Mosul. So we essentially ripped out with 101st when we came into Mosul.
So what was the combat action you saw? Was it IEDs or was it?
So here's an interesting little tale. I guess the media campaign or the PR campaign must have worked. Because when we rolled in with these highly unusual vehicles, all these American soldiers wearing Oakley shades, wearing a uniform that most people have never seen before. In fact, they called our uniforms mop suits because they looked like they looked like the old green mop suits because they had Velcro pockets and the pockets were different and the whole thing. So there was an aura about us when we came in. And later on down in the conflict, I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of the Iraqis that had actually just surrendered. And they said, we were told that the dark glasses allowed you to see through walls. Like you had Superman vision.
Oh, well, that's nice to have following you.
Well, yeah, they said you have these vehicles that were supposedly bulletproof, bomb-proof, everything. Now, granted, they eventually figured out how to, any good adversary will figure out a way to kind of adapt and overcome. But it was very interesting that we had a lot of mortar attacks. We had a lot of direct fire engagements in and around our compound area. We were headquartered out of Mosul. We had elements up in Tikrit. We had elements out west, and we also had elements that were up in the Kurdish-held region. So we were kind of spread out. Basically, all of northern Iraq was our responsibility all of a sudden, and so we had a lot of IEDs. We had a lot of ambushes that occurred. One of our battalions just got lit up by close to 500 insurgents / Iraqis. They ended up losing a couple of soldiers, a couple of vehicles, but they actually took care of, the situation, as it were. But there was still a lot of direct fire going on.
Yeah, I can imagine. What were your operations like at that time? I mean, this is an experimental unit, really. And sure, it deployed in the United States a few times, but this was new.
Yeah.
How did it? What was its purpose to function, and how did it function?
Well, the purpose of why it functions or how it functions, I think we already kind of covered that a little bit. The interesting part was because we had built-in high-capacity satellite systems, and it was just sidebar real quick. We had these KU satellite systems, KU band. And they were commercial off-the-shelf pieces of equipment that we cobbled together, both the soldiers and then the brigade coordination cell back when I was designing it. And we had 3 of these things. And so we set up one down in Arifjan, down in Kuwait. And then that was tied into a step site to go back to the States or wherever else around globally. Then we had the other one at the headquarters, and then we had the other one at the jump talk, as we call it, the brigade alternate talk. Between these 3 systems, we had more bandwidth and transmission capability than any other unit in Iraq.
I bet.
And so much so that I had the CFLIC commander, or actually the CFLIC's communications officer, Al Lin was his name, and he became a very good friend of mine. He was the 3rd Signal Brigade commander at the time. After I set up the system, they realized how much bandwidth I was pulling down, and they actually asked to jump on our network because it was more reliable. It was just very interesting. So we called this KU system IKSS, which is basically an acronym for the Interim KU Satellite System. And so we used this IKSS, and everybody was like, "What the hell is an IKSS?"
Yeah, right.
But how did it perform in Iraq? It was amazing. We integrated with 4th ID. 4th ID was down there. They were using an older version of FBCB2, which at the time they say you could not mix environments of FBCB2. We did it. We found a bridge, and we were able to communicate, so we could have a division and a brigade seeing each other. So now you can see Blue Force and Blue Force from different units, which was amazing. And those satellite systems, the reason why I brought that up is they were, again, a pod that everybody communicated back to, which then tunneled back through the network. So you might be 500, 600 miles away, but I could see all their vehicles still on my screen, on my FBCB2. So it was very powerful, and it worked very well from situational awareness for commanders on the ground. They loved the technology. They were frustrated initially because they're so used to, it's hard to break, a habit of just grease pencil and dry erase and the whole thing. And they still did that for their squads and platoons, but they didn't really need to because they had this FBCB2 now, and they could actually have complete visibility of where the friendlies were. So you didn't have a lot of fratricide. And in fact, I don't think we ever had a case of fratricide when I was deployed with the Stryker Brigade.
That's amazing.
You couldn't see the bad guys unless you got a spot report and somebody posted it, but it was still amazing technology, and it made commanders' jobs so much easier to be able to kind of maneuver their forces because they can see the map, they can see the actual terrain, they can see objects that are, that weren't there when the maps were produced maybe 30, 40 years ago, and they can see it. And then they could see their forces moving around. And it just made integration of fires, integration of support, intel was better. It was fantastic. Now we didn't have drones back then. We didn't get them until a little bit later on down the line, but it was still pretty impressive technology, and it worked very well, I think.
What was the outcome? You obviously helped. Did that spread to other divisions, to other brigades that were using it?
At that time, no. We were under strict rules that you're not going to share the FBCB2 system. There were occasions that we did, but that was because we got directed from higher that somebody needs it, and that's where we get into some of the three-letter agencies that we work with quite extensively in Mosul and other locations. But interesting enough, the State Department never asked for it. But elements that work under the State Department did, and we approved a couple of those to allow them to have visibility.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't see the CIA letting this slide past them.
Yeah, I mean, the CAG guys, they wanted one, and so, CAG is Delta, but they got one. We gave them one, their little detachment.
Now, were these site-to-site communications or site-to-satellite?
So at the time, it was line of sight. It was called EPLRS. Okay. The backbone of the FBCB2 back then was something called EPLRS, which is Enhanced Position Locating Reporting System, and it's still radio waves. Granted, they were tuned to be a little bit better in bandwidth and capability. It's nothing like it is today, but it was still revolutionary and evolutionary to what it is today. I mean, it's what they have today is just amazing what they can do now.
Sure.
Brings up security concerns, but I won't get into that.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. So tell me, you went from Iraq to Afghanistan.
So me personally, so when I was
right, you were no longer with the Stryker Brigade.
When I was no longer with the Stryker Brigade, I actually had back-to-back deployments. So when I was with the Stryker Brigade, we were there for about a year, and we're getting ready to kind of rotate out. And I got asked to become the executive officer for a signal brigade that had just gotten into country. A signal battalion. And so I accepted that position, and so now I was part of a signal brigade, a battalion as their XO. So I did another year tour there
in Iraq.
In Iraq. During that time, we did a lot of traveling. We started to communicate with the folks in Afghanistan. There was a drawdown of sorts at that point in time, a little bit of a drawdown. So we had to fly every once in a while back and forth between Afghanistan. I didn't really actually deploy to Afghanistan until when I was a little higher in rank. But during that period of time, it was predominantly in Iraq.
Okay. So how did you, when you left the Stryker Brigades and you went to Brigade and you went to Afghanistan, what happened to the Stryker Brigades? I mean, how did it turn from one thing into the modern stuff that we have now?
Yeah, so the first Stryker Brigade, and then there was a second Stryker Brigade. There was, I think, a plan for one more in Europe, one in Alaska, and then a reserve one out of Pennsylvania that was supposed to have a Stryker Brigade there. I think that's generally still how it is a little bit. I think they've bumped up a couple of the brigade numbers in the sense of the number of brigades that are enabled with the vehicle at least. But I think what the Stryker Brigade demonstrated is that digital communications, pushing what you would normally consider core and division communications assets down to the lowest level works. There was a lot of fear when we built the Stryker Brigade that the information would be an overload for commanders. The commanders would see so much information they wouldn't know how to filter it, and they would kind of have analysis to paralysis. I think we demonstrated that that's not really what happens. And especially now that the proliferation of cell phones and internet and the whole thing nowadays, you've got an extremely savvy military and general public. A lot of this stuff is very intuitive. So I think a lot of units today have the same capability. They just don't have the Stryker vehicle itself. I mean, the Army is changing vehicles all the time. So I don't think the Stryker Brigade is unique anymore, per se.
Well, it would make sense for the communications ability to go to everybody because they could benefit from it.
Right. Well, yes. And there's an interesting part of that as well, because one of my final jobs before I retired was I was working within TRADOC in Arctic, which is basically was in charge of overseeing all of the centers of excellence within the Army, whether it's infantry, field artillery, fires, signal, and collecting the requirements documents, and then building a POM for Congress. And it was interesting when I was in that position, I was told that I had to figure out how to downsize the number of signal assemblages in the Army while still transforming the Army. And so it became a budgetary shuffle. Some they're going to have some have the haves and some have the have-nots. And so it was just a very interesting, a different perspective and lens that you could look at the military. My last job was to see the politics behind some of it that goes on, the extreme pressure from the government to ensure that the Army is held accountable for their budgetary expenditures, and some of the directives and some of the decisions that are made. Because when I was that little Stryker guy, I always wondered, why the heck do we have this? We could just get that why are we doing this? And it became very clear as I got higher up in the organizations.
Understood. So how did you wind up in Afghanistan?
So Afghanistan was one of I was the assistant G6 for down in Kuwait and Arif Jan as part of RSET. And so we were responsible for, obviously we were responsible for Kuwait, we were responsible for Iraq, we were responsible for Afghanistan. Anything in Southwest Asia, RSET was in charge of. So I was, as the assistant 6 or the deputy 6, I got an opportunity to travel everywhere and actually sit and work with people and resolve problems that are occurring in some of these locations where we have our service members. And at that point in time, when I was in that position, there was a move to draw down everything. This was, I believe, in the Obama era, that it's like we're gonna get ourselves out, and Iraq, we're gonna get all of our service members out, and we're gonna hand it all over to the State Department. Afghanistan staying the way. We're gonna downsize to less than 15,000 service members on the ground, and so I was tasked with being the communicator that went out and actually engaged all the units that were out there trying to figure out, how do we do this? So it was more administrative and less kinetic when I went to Afghanistan specifically.
Now, you said you had some combat stories to tell.
They're not as cool as some of the members on some of your other videos, but I will say that they're.
As I said, we're not into combat porn.
And I think that some of the, I hate to say combat is funny, but at times it can be funny, and I think it's funny to us at the moment because it's a way to kind of get your nervous energy and your fear out, is to just laugh it off. And I think one of the funny combat stories is we were in the Stryker, we were in Mosul, and we had a lot of reporters that would come in. And there was one reporter that happened to be, at the time, very well known, had a very large talk show, the whole thing. And he was coming in, and we got notified through PAO channels that this guy wanted to come to Mosul. And he wanted to talk to soldiers and get real combat information and stories and stuff like that. And so we're like, great. And he's like, I got the word was he had his own private security and the whole thing. Well, when this gentleman showed up, he showed up with his cameraman. He showed up with his makeup artist. He showed up with all sorts of crazy things. He shows up and he barrels into the sub palace there in Mosul, and he gets out and he's leaning against the front hood of his truck, and he saw passing soldiers, and he started literally grabbing soldiers as they were walking by, and these soldiers are just trying to go to the DFAC. And he's trying to talk to them and just buddy up with them. Mm-hmm. He's not trying to interview them. He's just saying, hey man, I'm in combat zone. And I watched one of these engagements, and I'm not one of those guys that likes the spotlight, especially back then. And the soldiers would walk away from him after engaging with him and say, sir, he reeks of alcohol. So this individual, somehow, maybe he brought it with him, maybe he bought it on the economy, as it were, but he was shit-faced drunk, pardon my French. In
a country that theoretically doesn't have alcohol.
Oh no, they have liquor stores in Iraq. Yeah. In northern Iraq, you can get liquor, that's for sure. But it was so crazy, it was funny that this guy, and he expected to get the time of the brigade commander and the corps commander that was actually there in Mosul as well, who happened to be a designated 1-star that came out of Fort Lewis 1st Corps here. And they had a meeting that evening. The next day, we were told, as the Stryker guys, to put together a security group to escort this individual back to the airport.
And make sure he got there.
And make sure he gets there. And the reason why, and this is the flip, so that's the funny side of the story. The sad part of that story, and it happened almost simultaneously, is why did this guy show up in this truck, barreling through the gates, yelling and screaming that, get out of our way, we're getting in, was because his private security detail that he had, which was really honestly made up of a bunch of Fijians and Guamanians that had their Humvees and their private security, had gotten ambush coming up to Mosul to protect this Yehu. And I think they lost, out of the 14 people that were in those vehicles, they lost 4 of them.
Whoa.
And the reason why I know this is because, talking about PTSD, their Humvees that they showed up with barreled through the gate, in advance actually of this guy's vehicle, and parked right in front of the palace grounds. And every single one of the vehicles was spiderwebbed.
Wow.
With rounds, and saw one of the gunners get out, and he was bleeding from a wound in his head, and I won't go into the gory details of what that looked like, but he was walking and he was talking, and I was standing next to him from you to me, and he was holding his eye like this, and I said, my God, brother, are you okay? And he's like, I'm fine. I'm just going to go and get medevaced. And we were really concerned about him because he was an enormous person, clearly a devastating wound to his head, and he ended up dying en route. And it kind of sobered us up that it's not a bunch of military people being here. We've got people that are contractors or otherwise that are here on the ground, and they're putting their lives on the line for this Yehu.
Yeah. That
just got escorted out the next day. So I mean, that's one little combat story that kind of blends in together. I there's a lot of funny stories, at least from the Iraqi version of things. I also deployed with the 25th ID as their G6. That was a series of interesting stresses and humor at the same time. Because we were from Hawaii, our Deputy Command General for Logistics, excuse me, who has just recently retired as a 4-star general. He had positioned himself in northern Iraq when we redeployed out there as 25th ID, and he decided he was going to bring a piece of Hawaii with him. So he had one of his mill vans was completely dedicated to a complete tiki bar, including palm trees, surfboards, the whole thing. And sure enough, when you went up to his command post up there, he had a whole tiki bar set up. And of course, they're not drinking alcohol, but it was just like a slice of home from Hawaii, and it was just great. It was a dedicated building, and it was just like something out of MASH. You'd see.
That's a stream.
It happens.
Combat brings out the weirdest.
Well, but it also brings out some of the. You need to have a little bit of humility and humanity brought to you every once in a while, and the humanity of knowing that you got people still at home. You've got a piece of home here, and you're going back to it. If you can survive this little piece of history that we're going through right now, you're going to go back to those folks.
What was for you the most stressful of what you did?
So it's interesting. I mean, some of your viewers might say, well, he's an officer, he's not infantry, he's not a frontline shooter. In this day and age, everybody's a shooter for all intents and purposes.
In this day, there's no front line.
There is no front line, yeah. But I think, I could say that it's the long nights, it's the, not sleeping or eating for 3 or 4 days, getting shot at. It could be a lot of things, but I think the biggest stress for most military members is just interaction with leadership and others around you. It's unfortunate that I think a lot of the stress that soldiers, especially downrange, experience is really due not so much from the environmental stuff of what you're there to do. It's about the environment of, unfortunately, your brothers and sisters that are standing next to you. Because everybody reacts to stress differently. Everybody has a different reaction to something they see or do. And so what I experienced, probably the hardest thing for me was just some of the behaviors I saw out of people officers. We're not even talking about enlisted right now. And I think I need to be very clear. I think some of the strongest and most well put together individuals that I saw downrange were really the NCO Corps as a whole. Amazing. They always say, countries around the world say, how do you have the world-class national non-commissioned officers corps that you have? We do have an amazing NCO Corps.
Certainly ran the Navy when I was in it.
Well, and I think what was sad and what was really glaring is, it kind of separates the wheat from the chaff were the officers that I actually engaged with. There were some that didn't feel like they needed to be out there. There were some that felt that because they were out there, they're going to make it hard for everybody else. If they're going to feel pain, I'm going to make you feel pain, type of thing. And then we had situations where I would equate it to a game of Survivor, where you have 2 camps of people. It was almost like something out of grade school. That you are in combat. You do realize that you're in combat. So if I raise my voice to you, that does not mean that I'm threatening you. Mm-hmm. That means we have an urgent action that needs to go.
Right.
Nowadays we have sensitivity training and the whole thing. We didn't have that stuff back then. A lot of people would say, we had zero training and there was a reason for it, because we're gonna create and forge killers. But I think the biggest stress for me personally was some of the engagements, some of the complaints that would come down. You know, I'm in an infantry unit. I predominantly deployed only with infantry units. Infantry units to me are the rawest of the raw, but they're damn good at it.
Yep.
So if they tell me to F off, I could be like, hooah.
Yeah,
Let's go.
right. Let's go.
But you know, when you're in the environment that I was in, you know, you have a lot of other organizations, a lot of different personalities that are not necessarily all infantry. So it takes some getting used to. Because I was predominantly, again, raised and kind of nurtured through the military as an infantry guy, I kind of assumed the persona of an infantry guy, kind of forgetting that I'm working in the Signal Corps.
Got it.
And so sometimes I would come across a little bit too brash, a little too assertive and aggressive. So, you know, that led to some stresses because that would percolate to, we've got a problem with Paul Fischer. And so, you know, mentally that affected me. I think the worst situation was when I was in the 25th ID, and I had to go through an investigation while I was downrange.
And that was for what?
I guess I'll say that this is what it was. I used to have a Benchmade knife, an auto opening Benchmade knife, and in the infantry, that's a nervous habit. All the infantry guys do it. They just sit there and they're flipping open their knife.
Sure.
It's like the spinners. You know, the old spinners they used to have?
Yeah.
So you're downrange, you're just opening, flicking, and closing your knife. Well, I guess when I was in the 25th ID, the organization that was mine, some of the soldiers did not appreciate. They thought they were threatened that I was threatening them with a knife.
Oh gosh.
Then it just started to snowball a little bit. You know, I'm all about the soldier. I've always, when I was an OC at NTC, I used to tell these officers and senior NCOs, I said, you know, every single decision you're making at this level here in the battalion or the brigade is infecting somebody. But you've got to realize that if you screw it up, the guy that's down there in the foxhole, the guy that's sitting there in the foxhole and is about to pull his trigger or get shot is relying on you to do your job.
Yep.
So I don't care what you think your mission is. Your mission is A, support the commander's intent. B, support that guy in the foxhole, that poor slob that's out there in the foxhole somewhere, because he's your bread and butter in the end. And I think as you go higher up in the organizations of the military, that perspective starts to get lost. You know, I think it becomes about them. And so one of the other complaints that I had received is in the housing area when we were in Iraq, the CHUs, Containerized Housing Unit, we finally were going to get internet brought in from a contractor.
Gee, how modern.
Yeah. And they were going to wire every single one of the connexes or the CHUs with wireless internet. And I remember they came to me because I was the division signal officer. And they said, hey, sir, we're planning on doing this. And I said, super cool. I'm totally supportive of it. Could I ask you a favor? Is there a possibility that you could install it into my CHU first so I can at least test it and I can kind of gain, I could be your advocate. I could kind of be your test subject and just say, hey guys, yes, because you had to pay for it. This is good stuff. Well, that came back around as he wanted to have it first because he thought he was more important than everybody else. Which was, I was about caring for the soldier, being with the soldier. And a lot of that suddenly got twisted, and it was twisted. And thank God the leadership of the 25th ID at the time, phenomenal leaders. Seriously, the division commander, I visited him when he became the West Point commandant, I believe it was, or president, I forget which one. Because he was there originally and then came and became the division commander, and then he went back there. And I actually went and visited him in West Point and just sat down with him. And then, of course, the other two commanding generals that worked within the operations and logistics, phenomenal leaders. Chief of Staff, phenomenal leader. I still stay in touch with him and his wife. Thankfully, the command realized that this is kind of stupid.
Yeah.
But it went on for so long.
This bothers someone in a combat zone.
Yeah, this went on for me so long that my my sergeant major of the G6, he actually one day asked me, he said, "Sir, should I take your 9mm?" And I said, "Sergeant Major, don't even. I would never do that." He said, "I'm concerned for you." Thank God I have a sergeant major that actually, had some care and compassion that really asked me those tough questions. I appreciate it. That made me feel better than anything else, honestly.
Yeah, because he's watching out for you.
But it made the last 6 months of that deployment with the 25th ID absolute hell. It was difficult to trust my subordinates. It was difficult to, I powered through it. I was still successful. It just, from a mental standpoint, if there was a PTSD, it wasn't combat related. It was blue on blue, and it was terrible. It was terrible. And the problem with that is because, my wife recognized when I was communicating with her the entire time.
Of course.
But when I came home, it impacted her. My stress level, the reaction I had to what was occurring downrange, that wasn't even combat related, impacted her. It impacted my kids, and even today, it still impacts me. It's one of the reasons why I'm sitting with you. It's the lasting effects of some of that stuff, and you could call it PTSD. I think PTSD is very similar to Kleenex. Now, I mean, it's
everybody has it.
Everybody has it. I stubbed my toe and now I have PTSD. I think I'm not trying to downplay people's reaction to stress and the way they internalize it, but I think that was the most stressful time in the entire military that I ever had. And thank God I had a command leadership team that was able to support me and continue to support me even after I left the job.
That says an awful lot. That says an awful lot.
Let me ask you one question. What could have happened if you didn't have those commanders stick by your side? What was the worst thing that could have happened in the position?
I could have been relieved from my job as the division G6. That would have been an easy answer. But I think they saw through it, and they saw enough in me that they say, this guy, he needs to stay here because he's doing stuff for the soldiers that is good. And so I could see in different scenarios I probably would have been, sent home, honestly. I probably wouldn't have gotten promoted if I didn't have that level of support. So this all happened when I was lieutenant colonel. We were talking earlier, my commander, my division commander, had exonerated me on the complaints. And I mean, I had to do some things. I had to sit down and talk to my troops and, explain, I'm apologetic about doing certain things. So in my division commander's mind, the case was closed. And then when we redeployed back to Hawaii, I was up for full colonel, and I was on the list. Fantastic, but then I got notified your promotion's put on hold because of an IG investigation. And come to find out that the Department of the Army IG had reopened the case.
Without asking.
Without asking, usurping the command's authority as a commander, at which point I had to go back to the division commander and I said, this is what happened. And he actually went to bat. He went to the Department of the Army IG and engaged them, and it eventually worked out. And I was able to get promoted, and I was able to go to the War College, and all the things that a successful colonel can do. But that whole thing put a really sour taste in my mouth about the military.
You said at the beginning you knew when to retire.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I still wanted to be I still wanted to be a colonel when I retired. And the only reason why I really wanted to be a colonel when I retired, because I told my dad, who retired as lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, that I was going to beat you.
Yep.
And I did, and I really wanted to do that, and then I got the opportunity to go to the War College, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I mean, what a dream to go to the War College, and I was so happy and thankful. My family loved it. It was probably the greatest year of healing that I could have with my wife and my kids, because I had deployed one more time between the 25th ID and then going to the War College. So, there was a silver lining out of all this.
Yeah.
But it still left a bitter taste in my mouth. I never forgot it, that's where I'm at.
Let me ask you this: why is this horseshit going on in a combat zone? I mean, isn't that kind of missing the point?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think I was a toxic leader downrange. I don't think I've ever been a really toxic leader. I think I'm a very demanding leader.
Yeah, you're in combat. You're supposed to be.
I think why this bullshit goes on in a combat rant, I don't know necessarily why. I think I kind of alluded to it as I think people came in the military not expecting what they were going to get. And I think the type of soldier we get in the military nowadays really needs to understand that when the balloon does go up, the balloon goes up.
Yep.
And it's not, it's not one of those situations where like, oh, well, but I didn't really think this was going to happen. You signed a contract. You pledged your loyalty to the Constitution, the president, the whole thing. If you didn't take it seriously then, you're taken seriously now. And it bugs me because I saw good friends and coworkers, die downrange. They gave the ultimate sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And then I have people that I essentially think that shouldn't be in the military, and they're making petty claims about something that I hurt your feelings. One of the other complaints, by the way, was I like to have fun in the office. I like to keep it light because it is a stressful environment.
Yeah.
But we used to throw balled up paper and just throw it at each other every once in a while. Well, one time I threw a balled up piece of paper and somebody didn't appreciate it. It showed up on the complaint list that he tried to assault me by throwing an object
with a paper
at me.
ball. Yeah.
With a paper ball. It got down to that point where I felt like screaming. And of course, you can't do that. But I just felt like screaming at the top of my lungs. If you don't like it.
I'm speechless. If I hadn't seen it myself in the military, but I'm speechless. What advice would you offer someone who is looking at a career in the Army? In the Signal Corps?
Well, so I have 4 children. 2 of my kids are in the military. My oldest is in the Air Force. And, I told him, you better be joining for the right reasons. You better be doing it because you want to really defend the Constitution. You really want to defend the United States. And it doesn't make a difference who is in the presidency.
No.
Nope. I said the same thing to my other son who's, Ranger, he's actually out of Fort Carson. Thank God we changed the name back.
Yes.
In a Stryker Brigade. And I remember talking to him before he got commissioned. I said, just make sure that you're going into this for the right reason. And that you're not doing it just because you want the free education in college, in your JRTC scholarship or whatever. I think you really need to be doing it for the right reasons. And if you're not going into the military for the right reasons, don't join the military, because there's people out there that are depending on you if you're an officer, especially if you're an officer. They're depending on you to make the right decision, the right call. And if you can't do it, don't do it. You may think you can do it, then great, do it. Then learn and become the leader that you think you should be to adapt to every situation. When I was visiting that former division commander in West Point, I had the opportunity to sit down with prospective parents, prospective students or cadets,
and their parents.
And their parents, but the cadets were pulled out, so the parents were in the room. And of course, I had a West Point, administrator there as well. And one of the parents said, I am so worried that my child is going to be in West Point and be in the Army and he might go to combat.
Well, duh.
I said to this group of parents, I said, I will tell you that if your child wants to be in the Army, the people that are in the Army right now, that are true professionals, that really want to be in the profession they're in, would give their left arm to be in combat.
That's right.
Because it's the only time you can really, truly put your skills to the test.
Yep.
And when I was told I was going to go into combat, I was excited. Not because I got to pull a trigger or see dead bodies or do whatever. It's because I got a chance to really execute my skill, my craft, in a real world situation. Not in a tent, not in a building, no, I get to do it for real. And people will depend on you.
Yeah.
And that is the
People's
proudest
lives will depend upon you.
it's the proudest, it should be your child's proudest moment to go into combat, and it should be yours as well, because you know your child has been prepared by a world-class military to do whatever the bidding of the nation is. I think that is, an exciting proposition, not something to shy away from or be scared of. Of course, you can miss your child, and I miss my son right now. He's in Korea. Okay, great. But I also know he's doing something he loves, and I'm never going to say no to that.
No.
So I kind of put a different perspective on it for those parents that were asking those questions and their fears and such. And you got to realize that it's not just that one child going out into combat all alone in a field. I mean, come on, you've got an amazing support staff around you. There's a supporting staff that's recognized as one of the best in the world. Your child will be fine.
You know, it's a good friend of mine, Cecile, said that what he misses most is his brothers, the people he was with.
Yeah.
He was enlisted. Yeah. And the people he fought with, the
Yeah.
people he fought beside. Because the ability to depend upon another person for your life and to have him depend on you for his is an emotional bond that's almost impossible to replicate. Sure, first responders can do it and others like that,
Yes.
but most people never can.
Yeah, and I still maintain connections with people that I've served throughout my years. The proudest moment for me is when I have one of my junior officers or even some of my NCOs actually reach out to me on LinkedIn and get my advice about something.
Mm-hmm.
For a leader, and it doesn't have to just be military. It could be any organization, just to have somebody come back to you because they felt like you were a good mentor to them, just warms your heart. I mean, I would stop everything I did when I was in the military to sit down and talk to people and just talk to the young officers, give them recommendations, give them advice, answer their questions. I have an open book. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I've always told them that. And they would ask me, how did you get to where you're at? Well, part of it is luck, being at the right place at the right time. But a lot of it is you need to understand what your leadership styles are. What do you enjoy, internally, and be authentic. I used to, throughout when I was growing up in the military, my definition of leadership would change depending on where I was at any one point in time. And I finally kind of landed on is that, a good leader is authentic, mm-hmm. Is flexible, and compassionate. I'll tell you a quick story that was just that occurred with my son, who's down in Korea right now. He is his girlfriend is pregnant, and he desperately wants to go see his girlfriend back in Colorado, but beforehand he had to go to the Special Forces qualification course. So he went from Korea over to Fort Bragg and did the qualification course. Unfortunately, he blew out all of his ligaments in his ankle. But he's sitting there at Fort Bragg, and I remember him calling me, and he said, he called my wife first, and he said, Mom, I'm really at Fort Bragg right now. I'm thinking I'm just going to go see my girlfriend and not redeploy back to Korea. And my wife said, I don't know if that's a good idea. because that's essentially AWOL.
Yeah, that's AWOL.
He goes, yeah, but I really want to see my girlfriend. And then my daughter got on the call with my wife and said, don't worry about it. I'm buying you the ticket to Denver right now. And then in a roundabout way, I found out about that later on in the afternoon. And I said, what the hell are you guys doing? You can't do that. And so I called my son the next day and I said, you know, what you're doing is tantamount AWOL. And that's a bigger problem that you'll have than you just don't want to go back to Korea and you miss your girlfriend. So we talked about it a little bit, and he basically said his leadership team is just the worst, and they hate him, and they're the worst people. They're the reason why I want to get out of the military, and all this stuff. And I said, can you give them some grace? Have you asked them? Just can I go on convalescent leave? Because I have a blown out ankle. I've got the med report from the special operations medics. Why don't you just send the paperwork and ask them, can I get con leave? And he said, well, they're going to say no. I said, you've got to give your leadership a chance to have some compassion for your circumstance. It's not about your girlfriend's baby. It's not about any of that stuff. It's you, and you've been running hard. You're doing something that most people don't get an opportunity to do. So you're already highly regarded in the organization, regardless of what you think they think of you.
Yeah.
So I said, do it now. I'm telling my daughter, I'm telling her to cancel that frickin' ticket. And so it was canceled. The next day, my son calls me. He says, Dad, I can't believe it worked. Those guys said, yeah, absolutely. Take 2 weeks convalescent leave. You got to heal yourself up, and then you come back to Korea. So what did he get to do? He got a chance to come over here and visit and stay with us for a while. He ended up not going to Denver, surprisingly enough, but he was able to hang out. And it's just because he didn't trust his leadership, but he didn't give him a chance.
Right.
And know that the leadership actually would have some compassion and understanding. And I think that's a mark of a good leadership technique.
Of course it is.
Yeah, it's
absolutely.
Anyway.
Well, you're dealing with people's lives. And part of dealing with people's lives is realizing they're human beings.
Yeah.
And some people forget that, most don't.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this.
I appreciate the time.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, talking to the audience about this. It's great to meet you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, and we'll see you next time.